Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Creative Adventures. Today in this video, I'm making the third in a series of recipes from Handmade Magazine, which is from Wholesale Supplies Plus. If you want to follow along, it's available in print form, but you can also get it digitally from their website, wholesalesupplisplus.com. The recipe I'm making today is actually cold processed soap. It's been ages since I've made a true soap, but I'm also gonna be making some melt and pour embeds to go in the top. So this one's gonna take a little longer than usual. This is a perfect recipe for the fall or winter. This one is called Campfire S'mores. So this is actually using a couple of fragrances. I did have to change the ingredients in this one just a little bit for myself because I couldn't find some of the ingredients that was in the recipe. They were either sold out or I just couldn't find them anywhere. So I did make some modifications. I'll point that out as we go through the recipe. But if you want to follow along, this particular recipe is in volume 61, page 36. So you're welcome to follow along with me while I make this super awesome cold processed soap. Stay tuned. Let's get started. Now, this recipe is gonna take a little longer to make than most of the ones I've done because it is divided up into two completely separate parts. The first part will be creating the melt and pour embeds that are gonna go on top of the soap. And then the second part will be creating the cold processed soap that is the main loaf of the soap. So let's go over ingredients first. I would always recommend that you run any cold processed soap, even if it gives you specific amounts. I still recommend you run it through a soap calculator to make sure you're using the right amount of lye. Since I did change some ingredients in this recipe, I absolutely did run this one through Soap Calc. That's actually my favorite calculator, soapcalc.net. But I also wanted to understand what ratios they were using for water to lye and also how much the super fat was in this recipe, and it is 5% super fat, and they're using a 2-to-1 ratio of water to lye, which is actually what I prefer to use anyway. So I ended up not having to change my lye amounts for this recipe, but I still always recommend that you run it through a calculator. The base soap is gonna be created in this mold, which is a tall and skinny mold. This one's from Crafter's Choice, which is Wholesale Supplies Plus. The recipe is formulated for this particular mold. So if you're gonna be changing the size of your mold, therefore needing to change the size of your recipe, obviously you will also need to run that through a soap calculator. This mold will hold a recipe that is comprised of about 28 ounces of oils. So that's what's going in here today. This is a slightly smaller recipe than I normally make. For the base soap, which is the s'mores part of the soap, we are using 4 different oils and butters, the first being olive oil. I buy this in big jugs from Costco. Coconut oil, this is 76-degree melt coconut oil. Also, I buy this in big jugs from Costco. Sweet almond oil, you can get this from a variety of resources, but I got this from Wholesale Supplies Plus. And cocoa butter, I got this from Amazon. I have already mixed up my lye water and melted down my oils, and I'm gonna set these off to the side so that they can come to about room temp while I'm working on my melt and pour embeds. Before this recipe, it is 11.2 ounces of olive oil, 7 ounces each of coconut and sweet almond, and 2.8 ounces of cocoa butter. And my lye water is a 2-to-1 ratio. It's about 7.9 ounces of distilled water and 3.95 ounces of sodium hydroxide. So we'll just set these off to the side and let them come to about room temp while we're working on our melt and pour embeds. For the remainder of our ingredients today, we obviously need melt and pour. I'm using a clear glycerin melt and pour. I have it off to the side because I buy it in huge 25-pound boxes and I don't want to drag it over here, but that's what I'll be using today for that. Our fragrances today are Campfire S'mores, and this one is going in the base soap. This fragrance does contain vanilla, so for the base soap, we're not gonna be using any colorant. We're actually going to be letting the fragrance itself act as a colorant. And for the melt and pour embeds, this is one of the changes that I made. This is sandalwood patchouli. The original recipe calls for autumn breeze. They were actually out of stock on that, so I spent some time searching on some fragrances that would have a similar note, which is a woodsy kind of campfire-y smell, and I chose this one, and I think these are gonna complement each other real well. Now for the melt and pour embeds, We're gonna be making 5 different batches of these with 5 different colors. The recipe actually calls for a fall sampler mica set that comes from Wholesale Supplies Plus. I already have colors that are either in that set or are similar enough that I didn't think it would make a difference, so I'm gonna be using colors I have on hand. But that will be Crimson Red Wine Mica. You can see that's a very red, orange, goldish, shimmery color. Gingerbread Brown. It's a very nice deep brown color. Golden Pineapple Yellow. And if you can't tell, these are mimicking the colors of fall leaves. Martini Olive Green. And finally, Siesta Sunset Orange. And these all came from Wholesale Supplies Plus. Now, to make the actual leaves themselves, I'm using a column mold. This is also from Crafter's Choice. It's an oak leaf mini mold. It's probably impossible for you to see the shape. I'll try to get it where you can see it. But we'll be just mixing up about 1 1/4 ounces of melt and pour with the color for that mold, and then just pouring it right down in. And so when it sets up, the side actually locks into place and it opens up, and you can pull the whole thing out and slice it into individual leaves. So let's get started with our melt and pour leaves. All right, so in a tiny little beaker here, I've got 1.5 ounces of clear melt and pour soap. This is just a glycerin soap base. I said 1.25 earlier, but it is 1.5 per color that we're gonna melt down. So I'm gonna go pop this into the microwave. You wanna melt it down in 30-second bursts and stir in between each until it's completely melted down and liquefied. So it didn't even take 30 seconds. It only took about 20 seconds for this to fully melt down. So first thing we're going to do is add our fragrance. And I'm just gonna use a little pipette here. This one will hold a total of 3 milliliters. We're just going to add 1 milliliter of fragrance to each cup, each separate color mixture of melt and pour. And for this, we're using the Sandalwood Patchouli. If you're using the Autumn Breeze, this is when you would use that. Mix that fragrance in really well. And now we're gonna take our first color. I'm going to do yellow first, which this is my Golden Pineapple. And I've got a teeny tiny little scoop here. This is actually, I believe, 1/8 of a teaspoon. It actually doesn't say, it just says just a pinch on it. So I think it's 1/8 of a teaspoon. And I don't even think it's gonna need that much. I'm gonna use about half of that scoop. And mix that in really well. You wanna make sure you try to get all of those clumps out. Yeah, it didn't need any more than that. So it's about 1/16 of a scoop of soap, or of colorant. Okay, now, when using this mold, you wanna make sure both sides are completely squeezed together like a Ziploc bag before you pour this in. And you wanna stand it up on its side, and we're just gonna pour it right into our mold. All right. Now, as you can see, that's only filling this up about 1/3 of the way. That's all we need. We're just making embeds for the top, so we don't need to try to fill this mold up all the way. But we're gonna sit this off to the side. I'm gonna tap it down just a bit. Make sure it all gets down in there. You're gonna set this off to the side and let this fully harden so that we can pull them out and cut them. And this waiting time is why this is going to take much longer than normal. So we'll be back in just a minute to pull those out of the mold. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, so we're gonna pop this mold open and see if these are ready to pull out. You just pull the sides apart. Open it up. It should pop right out. It's still a little soft, and it doesn't look like much right now because of all of the little tendrils on it, but you can see from the end what the shape looks like. So I'm just gonna set this to the side. We'll go ahead and make all of our other colors, and then once they get nice and hard, we'll come back and slice them into individual leaves. Okay, I've got the last of my oak leaves here, ready to pop out the mold. So, as you can see, I've already started cutting these up. Let's get this last one out and start cutting. Just cut these with a standard kitchen knife right on a cutting board. They slice really easy. These are gonna be so stinking cute. And I probably have way more than I actually need for this one loaf of soap. So we'll see. But look how dang cute these are. So these are going to go in the top of my soap. How stinking cute. And they smell really good too. They have like a nice woodsy scent. Exactly what I was hoping for when I swapped out those fragrances. Okay, I'm just gonna set these to the side. We won't need these until the very end. And now to part 2, making the actual cold process soap. So let me get my oils back over here. These have been sitting for a couple of hours now, so they should be about room temp. I'm just gonna check it real quick. Not quite room temp, but almost. We're at 78. And then my lye water here is at 73, which is about room temp. So that's perfect. These are right around the temp that I wanted. They are within 15 degrees of each other, so we are ready to make some soap. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do, the recipe doesn't call for this, but I always like to add sodium lactate to my cold process soaps. It helps it harden up faster and actually get harder. So you wanna add about a teaspoon per pound of oils. So I'll be adding 1.5 teaspoons to this recipe. And I'm just gonna add that right to my lye water. I'm gonna give that a stir. Now, let me get my stick blender ready. Now we're going to pour our lye water in and stick blend this just until it's to a good trace. And then I'm gonna split some of the batter off into a separate container before adding my fragrance to this bigger container. In we go. We seem to be at a nice good trace, so I'm gonna split off 16 ounces of this batter into a new container. All right. Now to this big bucket, I'm going to add my fragrance. And here I've got 1.75 ounces of that Campfire S'mores fragrance. And that's just going into the big bucket. We're not putting any into this bucket. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not actually using any colorant in the actual cold process soap. This fragrance has a lot of vanilla in it, so it's actually gonna discolor to a pretty dark brown. So we're gonna leave this part unscented. And then we'll do an in the pot swirl in this bigger bucket before pouring it into our mold. So let's get this fragrance mixed in really well. This is still super runny, but I'm gonna give it a shot anyway because this one's coming together really nicely. So I'm gonna take my unscented soap and I'm gonna pour it into 3 spots. We're not gonna stir this at all. Normally with an in the pot swirl, I will give it 1 stir with a spoon. I'm not even gonna do that. I'm just gonna go straight from that pour into my mold. Perfect. Make sure I get every little bit out of that bucket. Okay. Now, this is definitely too runny right now to put our embeds in, so I'm just gonna let this sit here undisturbed until it firms up enough that I can texture the top a bit, and then we'll stick those leaf embeds in. All right, it's been about 45 minutes and we are nice and setting up. So we're finally at a good point where we can add the melt and pour leaf embeds that we made. So I'm just taking a spoon and kind of lightly texturing the top of this thing. And I'm just gonna start putting them in. No rhyme or reason. Some will be flat, some will be sticking out. I'm just gonna wing it. I think that's pretty good. How cute are these going to be? I cannot wait to cut this. Okay, so we're gonna have to let this sit for at least 24 hours, maybe 48, somewhere in between there. And when this is ready to unmold, I'll come back and show you the cut. All right, you guys, it is time to cut into this beauty. Look at the top. Look how cute this is. I'm so excited to cut into this. It smells so good too. Just really, really cute fall soap. Oh, it smells so freaking good. You can see, before I even cut into it, just how much that fragrance discolored the soap. Remember, we didn't use any colorant at all in the base soap for this, in the cold process part. I can't see a whole lot of white. Well, I can on the bottom. You can see some white peeking through right there from the unscented soap. So I'm curious to see what this swirl is gonna look like on the inside. But I've got my cutter here and we're just gonna get to it. There we go. It's still yellow on the inside because it hasn't been exposed to air yet. I see a little bit of a white swirl, but it's really hard to tell this early in since it hasn't oxidized and actually turned brown yet. Oh, smells so good. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, we definitely have some swirl action going. It's so faint right now because it's still yellow instead of brown, but we'll have a nice good swirl there once this actually darkens up. So cute. All right, here are our finished bars of soap. I'll have to get the edges of these cleaned up once they get nice and oxidized, and I'll take some good pictures for you so you can see what they actually look like once they turn fully brown. But I do think I'll have some pretty good swirl action in there once this oxidizes a little bit. Overall, really happy with these, and I cannot wait to use them because they smell so good. Oh my gosh, they smell so good. Okay, until next time on Creative Adventures.